Hi, I'm Stephen Paul, and welcome to the land of Israel, God's story. This is going to be an extraordinary adventure we go on with Academy Award winner Jon Voight, who's going to tell the greatest stories of the Bible.
Swings around, and then he lets it go.
We're going to go off-road with a great tour guide, Aaron Schaefer.
That entire compound is called the Temple Mount. Under that massive platform is the peak of Mount Moriah.
And two extraordinary rabbis, Chaim and Levi Kunin.
The awareness how one man set out to change the entire world from right here.
This is going to be an extraordinary adventure. We're in the land of miracles. Israel, welcome to it. And let's go. Welcome back to the land of Israel, God's story. I'm Stephen Paul, Chaim Kunin, Jon Voight, Levi Kunin, and Aaron Schaefer. Here we are in a very special place that there's a story of Ishmael and Hagar. But why don't we go back in history a little bit, shall we? John, will you take us there?
This piece of the story begins when Abraham, who was called Abram at the time, had a wife, Sarai. And Sarai was so beautiful. When we find them, they're elder people. She was 69 or something at this time, maybe, huh? Aaron? 69, 66?
She went to Egypt. Something, yeah, like that. I have
In her
to,
60s, let's say.
She was in her 60s.
Yeah.
So
It's not polite to ask a woman her age.
Exactly right.
that's right, and that's probably what
She
happened.
was somewhere between 20 and 60. We don't know exactly.
Who is he?
I brought him along. Twin Steve.
They brought me from vaudeville just for you guys. They said, listen, the four
This
of them get
must
so
be the
serious.
this
Would you make a joke every once in a while? These guys are lighting them up. You're on.
So Abram comes to Israel, and he's only there at God's beck, and he's there. He goes to the Negev. He's not there very long, and a famine hits, and he's got flocks to feed, and his nephew Lot is with him, and his wife, and yet he has to go find water for the flocks, and so they go to Egypt. And as they go to Egypt, he says to his wife, "Please tell everyone that you're my sister, because if they know that I'm your husband, they'll kill me and take you. So do that for me." And so she does, you know. But Pharaoh's people find out that she's come into this land.
Israel.
This is in Egypt. When they go there, Pharaoh's people see her and are very impressed with her. Obviously, she must have been the most beautiful woman. And despite her age, you know, she was very, very beautiful. And they take her and they say, we think she's right for Pharaoh. And I don't know what Abram was doing at that time, you know, what kind of suffering he was going through. But God intervened quickly and put a plague on Pharaoh's house, and these people were, you know, racked with some kind of illness immediately, and then let known that this is someone's wife. And when the Pharaoh found out about it, he was upset because he was angry, but he was, you know, he was told by God, "You give this woman back," and he does give the woman back, and he says, "I don't know why you did this to me. Why would you do such a thing?" But he gave him of his wealth, of his enormous wealth. He gave Abram quite a lot of gold and flocks and even servants and stuff, and sent him on his way. So he was enriched in this process. But there's another thing that happened at that time, and in the Midrash it says that Pharaoh's daughter was Hagar, and she chose to be with Abram. She would rather be with Abram because of his beliefs in his ways, his belief in God, than to be in the surroundings of this wealth and freedoms of, you know, an enormous power. But she left that to go with this nomad, really. It's an amazing thing. So that's what sets the stage. Now, what happened after that was that Sarai couldn't conceive. She couldn't have a child, and she was getting in her later years. And nevertheless, God had promised that He was going to be the father of many nations through Sarai. But many years had gone by. So Sarai said to Abram, "Go into my servant Hagar and have a child, and maybe we'll be enriched in that way." And so that's what happened. And she became pregnant, and it says that once she had conceived, that she was very disrespectful to Sarai. And so Sarai got angry. She went to her husband, and he said, "Well, do what you want with her." And Hagar ran from the dwelling with Abram and Sarai, and she was probably going to go back to Egypt. But anyway, she ran out, and she was in the desert, and she was crying and pleading, and that's what we come to. Now, after I've said all of that, you correct me if I've made mistakes in that story.
Was any of that right?
But there was one.
All of it was right. We should go back to the beginning. One.
There's one very important point. It was more about the fact that Ishmael was demonstrating behavior.
No, Ishmael wasn't born yet at this point. This is when she's pregnant.
I'm talking about.
Where on the story?
Yeah, this is before. This is before. This is when she was. Yeah,
she was.
We'll get to that story later, Rabbi.
There was a fight between Sarai and Hagar,
so
and she
Aaron,
ran out.
You were impressed with that?
I was impressed with what John said.
Wow.
He got it right on.
Well,
John is a Torah scholar.
It's an accidental.
We're going to make him an honorary rabbi by the time this trip is over.
Yeah, amazing.
Do you have an extra black hat for him, guys?
Now listen.
It's a bad effort.
A bag. A hat doesn't make the man, you know.
But hold that thought, and we'll be right back after a word from one of our sponsors. And welcome back to the land of Israel, God's story.
These are amazing stories. The stories in the Bible are so widely influential to, novelists and writers from the beginning. Everyone goes back to the Bible as a kind of lesson in storytelling, and this is a story that is extraordinary.
When we speak of Hagar, so of course, and Ishmael, so the first thought that might come to mind is that they are the ancestors of the Muslim Arab world, our cousins that surround us.
Right. Brothers, cousins. And when you think a bit deeper, the entire episode of Hagar and Ishmael is read on the holiest days of the Jewish calendar, on the high holidays. Wow. And
it's read then because the heartfelt prayer of Hagar is similar to the prayer of Hannah.
Yeah.
Is a prayer that echoes throughout all of history and gives us the opportunity to break through whatever challenge we may be facing and to reach the essence of God.
Mm.
And one step further with Ishmael, even though he was sent out of the home of Abraham and Isaac because he was corrupting or attempting to corrupt Isaac with his ways. But when Ishmael dies, the Torah says the words Vayasef el Amav, that he was gathered to his people. And the commentaries, as brought down by Rashi, say that this is the ultimate evidence that Ishmael had completely returned from his ways and died a complete tzaddik, a righteous person who had returned from his evil ways, opening the path of teshuvah, opening the path of repentance to all of us. And that's part of the reason why we read the account of these people on the high holidays.
Is this Yom Kippur?
It's Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah.
Another point of that story is that when Hagar prayed, so the Torah says that
God responded to her where she was at. In other words, although knowing that in the future her descendants would become a big thorn for the children of Israel, and unfortunately that still continues till today, but thank God it's getting better in a great way. The Abraham Accords has made a huge difference in the relations between our cousins, and God willing that should continue. But because Hagar's prayer was there in the most sincere of ways, none of that was taken into account. A lesson for us all, that when we pray properly, then that's the moment that counts most. Not where we were, or not where we may be at in the future.
When we speak of this power of prayer and the power of forgiveness that is taught to us by the story and the life of Hagar and Ishmael, that happened right here at this location. This is where Hagar is encountered by the angel of God, who informs her of the birth of her son.
And his name shall be Ishmael, which means God shall hear.
And hears her prayer.
God hears.
So there must be a very tremendous power in this place, the power of prayer, where this prayer was introduced, and it's one that we invoke on the holiest day of the Jewish year. We'll be right back with the land of Israel, God's story. Welcome back to the land of Israel, God's story.
You know, John and the rabbis, they talked a lot about the spiritual meaning of the journey of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael. I'm a tour guide, so I'd like to connect it a little bit to what we see around us. And so there's actually two incidents in the book of Genesis that connect to Hagar, the maidservant of Sarai. And so in the first instance, like John said, she's pregnant with Ishmael, and she starts to feel like she can raise her head a little bit in the house. You know, here she's used to being a princess, and then she becomes a slave, a maidservant to Sarai. And when she gets pregnant, she starts to feel like, well, I'm not a slave anymore. I'm an equal. And Abraham tells Sarai, do what you want. And Sarai treats her very harshly to put her back in her place. And she runs through the desert. She runs south from Beersheba. And she comes to this area of the country, which is in the harshest desert. Even though we have water flowing around us, everywhere around here is very harsh desert. As we were driving in, you could see it's really stark and really barren. Very little vegetation. In the first incident in Genesis, when she arrives at a spring of water in this area, that's when God reveals to her that she should go back to her maidservant, go back to Sarai, subjugate herself. God says, subjugate yourself under her authority, because be comforted that the baby that's in your womb is going to be the father of a great nation, Ishmael, the father of the Arab people. And so she calls the place, the spring, where this revelation happened, in Hebrew, Be'er Lechai Ro'i. Be'er Lechai Ro'i, the spring or the well of the living one who I have seen, or who sees me. You could translate it either way. And so I brought you guys here to this location because this is one of the main candidates really for that first incident. The first incident that she calls Be'er Lechai Ro'i, although nobody knows for sure exactly where it is. When you come to this general area in the desert, there's not a lot of places with water like this, with springs that run, and this is one of them.
And the second incident, well, let's talk about the second incident. Go right to it.
So the second incident is after Ishmael is born. And in the meantime, by the time Ishmael is a boy of around 13 years old, Sarai gets pregnant. Sarai gets pregnant and she has her own baby, Isaac. And now once again, there starts to be a conflict because Hagar started to feel like she's the mother of the family, like she has the children and she had status. And now Sarai, she has her own son. Sarai starts to see how Ishmael, the son of Hagar, is not treating Isaac well. The Midrash tells that he was shooting arrows in his direction and all kinds of things, but what's clear is that he was not treating Isaac well. And so Sarai demands, she goes to her husband Abram and says, Garesh et ha'ama hazot ve'et bana. Expel this maidservant and her son. Get them out of here. And Abraham doesn't know what to do. And he turns to God, and God says, everything that Sarah tells you, do what she says. And Abraham doesn't want to do it. He loves his son. He loves his concubine. Now they've been like husband and wife for over 13 years at this point. But God says, do what she said. And so Abraham takes food and water and packs a bag for them and sends them on their way out into the desert. And Ishmael and Hagar, they set off into the desert with just what they can carry on their back, and they start going south. And I would assume that they're going south because Hagar is saying, well, I was kicked out of my house, so I'll go back to my father's house in Egypt. So they're going south towards Egypt. And at a certain point, their provisions run out. They didn't have maps in those days, so they probably lost the way. Usually a princess who's brought up with wealth doesn't learn how to navigate deserts by herself, you know? So she's going south and they get lost, and the provisions run out, and her son, her boy, collapses. He collapses. We don't know exactly where that happened. It could be here or somewhere in this area. But her son collapses of heat stroke, dehydration, and she sees her son dying in the beating desert sun. Here it's nice weather today, we're in the winter, but in the summer it gets really hot here. And she sort of drags him under one of the bushes that she can find because there's no shade. And she just gives up. She says, what am I supposed to do? My whole life is destroyed. And she can't watch her son anymore. She can't look at him because she knows he's going to die.
How old? How old is he?
He was around 13 at that time. Because of her pain and her suffering, you know, at that time, God revealed to her that there's a spring of water there, and they drank. And instead of going back to Egypt, they dwelt in the desert south of the land of Israel. And that's how the descendants of Ishmael became desert dwellers, while the other descendants of Abraham through Isaac, who ended up going into exile in Egypt and coming out of Egypt and coming in with Joshua and conquering the land, became farmers and business people and so on and so forth, and built up a country, while the descendants of Abraham through Hagar and Ishmael became desert dwellers.
By the way, his age was important. His age was 17. So he wasn't a young child.
You're right, it has to be. It has
His
to
age
be.
was 17. He
Because-
wasn't a young child.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it makes it sound like merciless.
But why? How do you know that? Why do you say that?
He was 13 when Yitzhak was
Born. But by this time, they were running around and playing together.
Is there any prayer that goes with this particular area and with any of the stories that we're telling here?
a song that King David wrote in the desert of Judea. And the words are, Sama lacha nafshi, my soul thirsts for you. Kama lacha besari, my flesh yearns for you. The eretz sia v'ayef b'limoyim, in a land that's desolate and tired without water. Kain ba'kodesh kazi sicha, so may I see you, God, in holiness. Lirais uscha k'leidecha, to see your strength and your honor. Then the song goes, Sama lecha nasti, Kama lecha besar, Yeretz siya.
This is the land of Israel, God's story.